Can I ask why blue? You just want to do something different?
To be honest, it goes as far back as Sonic the Hedgehog back in the day. I always dug the blue.
Why did I get that impression?
It should have been a dead giveaway. I mean, it's not too hard. Uh,
Mm.
and I just loved it. Like, I always wanted blue because I was like, man, everyone's doing red, everyone's doing black, everyone's doing blonde. And
Yeah,
you know how we all grew up, like the thought of any color outside the normal hair spectrum was like, ooh, Freakville. But I was like, you know what?
sacrilegious.
I said, fuck it. That's what
Yeah, I
happened.
get it. I totally get it,
Screw
man.
it. And then I remember when I first did it though. It
Mhm.
was when I was working at Guitar Center back in 2012, going into 2013. But the thing was, I kind of went overboard in the sense of I dyed my hair turquoise, but I didn't do just my hair. I did my eyebrows and my beard. And it was like going Super Saiyan Blue long before Toyotaro and Toriyama from Dragon Ball decided to gift us with Super Saiyan Blue. Who knew, right? But it became that thing where I'm like, almost every musician, almost every artist I know, they all look, their way, and that's cool enough. But I'm like, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to stick out a little more. What I did not count on was the fact that so many people, many years later, started catching on to making their hair blue, making their hair green, making their hair a cherry red or purple. I was like, okay, I did
Yeah,
not see this one coming.
yeah, it's becoming socially accepted now to do
Yeah.
that. So it's
Except
like,
for
all right, you guys aren't losers.
except for in the workplace, because it took a while before a lot of jobs were like, you know what, fuck it, the hair color doesn't matter. As long as they know how to do the job and as long as they know how
Yeah,
to work, that's all that matters.
you got to think warehouse jobs for that because warehouse jobs were like just show up on time, man. Just show
Yeah,
up and do the job. So
yeah,
that's what it ultimately came down to.
yeah, for sure.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Torres Has Entered the Chat. I'm your host, Brian Torres. And today we have a special guest with us. Longtime friend of mine, special guest Ronnie Gonzalez. He's been a friend of mine for, wow, almost like what, 20 years, you'd say? Like close to?
Bro,
We're
for
getting there.
real. Like we're
It's
we're
like a marriage.
talking since like 2001. So we're talking like 24 years, my guy.
Wow.
Think about that.
We've been friends longer than most marriages, most successful marriages. It's crazy.
Word. It's like,
But
and the thing too is we've been through so many ups and ridiculous downs too, and somehow
yeah,
you just come full circle.
yeah, we're in each other's orbits. For my viewers who are listening, Ronnie's a musician, he's an artist, he's a streamer, he's a writer, and most importantly, he's a fellow dad. He gets it, and he's my best friend. So you want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, like like Brian over here, I got a little girl. He has a few. Of course, so by default, we're both in the dad club. You know, um, I've been a musician since 2000, so we're talking 25 years since I've had a guitar in my hands. Um, as far as art goes, I've been doing that since I was a kid, from like drawing little pro wrestlers beating each other up in a wrestling ring to like
Yeah.
trying to do little shots of like X-Men and Spider-Man and Superman and Batman, whatever. Since as far as I remember, like since I was able to hold a pencil. Um, of course, I have my YouTube channel, Ron322, where I do streaming of video games, and of course, I also don't just sit there and play a game and just yeet myself off, but I also use it as a means of analysis and also commentary because if I'm going to play a game, I want to play a game that has meaning, has a story that we can sit down and really break down, where it's like it'll make our brains turn. And that's how I like to engage gaming when it comes to my platform. And of
Right.
course, I have some of my music on the channel too. So
Nice. A
we
great
just
way to put the music out there. Yeah.
yeah.
So, for my viewers listening, this is the first part of a miniseries called Holy Ghosted, and it talks about just growing up in church and how people have like learned to move away from Christianity and how that we've dealt with that and coping with that. And I just want us to kind of go over what that experience was like, just from even from a musical standpoint. And we'll kind of get into that with some of these questions. But again, just want to give the viewers a chance to understand what this is about and just to get into it. So without further ado, I'm going to roll right into the first question. So Ronnie, how did you discover you had a passion for music?
All right, here we go. So, interestingly enough, usually kids grow up and they're like, "Ooh, I like music." Me, I was like, I dreaded it. I hated it, mainly because of how I grew up. And for context, for everyone here that's watching right now, we're talking a conservative, Pentecostal, Hispanic environment in New York City. If that sounds like an oxymoron to you now, it's because we're talking 90s and 2000s. We're not talking like today. Today is a different environment up north when it comes to religion and music. It's a whole different environment, whole different vibe than when we grew up. We grew up, it was
Right.
different. Like, so like every time everyone's singing, I just dreaded it. And then the peer pressure, being forced to sing. Like, to be honest, I didn't even want to sing. I just didn't
Yeah.
even want to do that. It ended up happening just because it was like, all right, fine, fuck it.
I would compare it to being like an altar boy or something or choir boy, where you're just sitting there and you're going through the motions and you're just singing these hymns that you don't even relate to, or just singing in a key that's not natural for the human being, something like
Yeah, yeah.
that.
It's almost like an 8-year-old kid singing about love and a breakup when they haven't even been in a relationship before. Like, what?
Yeah,
Like
that's a
that?
very good comparison.
It's the best way I can think of. And then even back in elementary school, you had the chorus class, which was extra curricular activity. They're like,
Right.
hey, he's an alto. He's got potential, and I just really didn't care. And a lot of it didn't have to do with school. It had to do with being in church and how the music was. And that's given that the church I grew up in, Fuente de Vida, by no means were majority of the singers bad. Like, most of them could hold the key. Most of them can stay in 2 octaves. Like, if you're in a 1 or 2 octave minimum and you can stay in key, you're good to go. It's not like some of the singers that we saw in the late 90s and 2000s in
Um,
church where they were forget about A through G sharp. We had people on the note of Z diminished. I don't even know what that is. I don't know how you find that, but we know for a fact.
we know it exists. It's out there somewhere
It's
in the
there.
spectrum of the music notes.
And you can't undo it from your memory. But then,
So,
the thing was, when
uh,
I started to be like, go ahead, I'll cave in to the pressure, I started kind of digging it. I was like, you know
okay.
what? Okay, I do have something going on. So I found myself just whenever like I had to pick a special song or whatever for the next youth service or whatever, or kids service, I
Mm,
will sit down, find a track from a singer, whether it's Rene Gonzalez, Jesus Adrian Romero, Marcus Witt, Luis Santiago, and just practice that one song. And sometimes I would completely misinterpret the lyrics when I'm practicing them at home, or be like, Ronnie, you're singing the absolute opposite of what they're singing. I was like, damn, you're right. But
you're
then,
just a natural born contrarian.
yeah, it was like, but then eventually I would actually like get a grasp of it. I'm like, okay, getting the feel of it.
Yeah.
So learning timing kind of became a practice thing that eventually became like clockwork for me. And then when it came to singing, like for example, I had to sit down and think about this earlier today. Like Rene Gonzalez, I was like, he's a baritone,
Yeah.
maybe little falsettos of someone who's a tenor. Luis Santiago, he's somewhere between tenor and alto. Jesus Adrian Romero, obviously, hopelessly a baritone. Samuel
You
Hernandez,
had a little bit of range to work with there.
yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the falsettos that baritones can pull off that can
Yeah.
take them to the bottom end of tenor. And then you have someone like Samuel Hernandez who's a bass.
Right.
Like if
And
a
it's funny,
penguin could
the
sing,
artists that you put out are what I would have considered for that time. Like
Yeah.
now there's like more progressive, but for that time I would have considered them a little more progressive than some of the other artists around that time because everything was a little more antiquated as far as sonically and just the style of music and
Yeah.
vocal. But those guys were kind of like pushing the envelope as far as what kinds of genres they were infusing into like Latin music and in the church. And so it was kind of like a almost a little bit of a reprieve because it was like I don't want to sing like this hymn like music. I want something with a little
A little
gain,
more,
little. Mhm.
a little touch. Yeah, like Rene Gonzalez, he had stuff that he had elements of pop. He had elements of rock. I mean, you couldn't even deny it. It was there in a way that wasn't overwhelming, but also approachable at the same time.
Right.
And even Jesus Adrian Romero, he seemed to have, that, he had moments where in some of his albums, he had little touches of salsa, a little touch of merengue, but then he had, that signature pop and even like that Queen type of We Are the Champions vibe going on, especially on
Yeah.
the beginning tracks of his albums. Little things like that resonate well. I was like, you know what? I can get with this. I can't get with Carmen Sanabria or I forgot the other lady. I mean, there's so many more old school Christian Spanish speaking artists that we grew up with where our parents could go ahead and recite them. I will not remember majority of them.
Yeah. But would you say that that's what led you, like just having that pressure led to you finding your own voice within that? Like, was that how you developed a passion for it, or like what was that the catalyst?
I would say it was the first seed that was sown in. The next stage was when my uncle peer pressured me. Once again, peer pressure has been the catalyst for everything with me into learning guitar. He's like, yeah, you can sing, but you need to learn an instrument. I
Yeah,
didn't care for piano. Bass seemed boring to me. And guitar, I was like, mm. But once he eased me into it, I was like, you know what? I'm learning something with this. I can actually expand myself as a
mhm.
singer better by learning guitar. All of a sudden, I started learning shit like, hey, you don't necessarily have to sing into that key that Luis Santiago's singing in because that key might be 2 or 3 keys too high for you.
Yeah,
Go ahead and once you learn the chord progression, be like, you know what? Let me change it down here. This actually works better for me because a
yeah,
song that might be on B flat may be too high for me, but on G on a lower register will work just fine.
yeah.
And it made me really appreciate music more. And then and then one day, sitting my ass down, watching the Billboard Music Awards with my uncle, got to see Creed perform higher up on that rooftop in Vegas.
Yeah,
That for me was I was like, wait, guitars can do what?
yeah,
I was like, what? And next thing you know, my uncle started like, yo, we start whipping out guitar tabs and everything and learning Creed songs, Linkin Park, Bush.
yeah,
And then I said, during that, because again, we were Christians, like, I mean, there's got to be some Christian bands out there I can get into that I can enjoy, and not feel guilty of them not being Christian. So, next thing you know, listening to Skillet, Third Day, um, Michael W. Smith.
I do. Yeah,
I was okay with, but then you had Michael W. Smith, yes, Stephen Curtis Chapman. Um, you had we didn't have Red yet. They weren't in yet.
no,
Or
but
Demon
I
Hunter.
think Hillsong had started to really grow at that time. So some of their songs became more like rock heavier. Like they were like soft church music into soft pop, and then eventually they evolved into like soft rock. Oh, like it was like a progression there eventually.
Yeah, if you can call it that. I mean, and
Yeah,
again, at
yeah.
the time, I didn't know about Hillsong either. I only know Hillsong because of random, oh, the gospel songs today commercials. The
Yeah.
one that's the what was it the Time Life music commercials you'd have on TV at like 5
2
in the
a.m.
morning on a Sunday. It'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Wow, you're taking me down memory lane. But speaking about influences, brings me to my next questions. So I've heard about some of your influences in church, and now you mentioned Creed. What are some of your influences outside of church?
all right. If we're talking non-Christian artists that were influential, I mean, obviously we got Creed. That's a
Yeah,
given. You got guys like Alter Bridge. right? Which again, you throw in Miles Kennedy, like Miles Kennedy, I was like, oh, that's singing on next level at the time. So I was like, you know
Nah,
what?
that brother got a voice like an angel. It's crazy. That dude can
That
sing.
he is a killer tenor, and I love his voice for that. Uh,
Hmm.
Black Label Society. I mean, I love
Yeah,
Black Wild. He has girthy, like if a guitar had testicles, like massive ones. Listening to Black Label Society is it like every time he freaking throws in a riff, you feel like you're punching someone right in the nuts. You know, it's
yeah,
heavy, it's girthy, and I got to learn pinch harmonics the best way just by listening to Black Label Society.
yeah.
Killswitch Engage, I mean, they're freaking great, especially with Howard Jones. I
Oh
haven't really
man,
gotten too much into their recent work. You know,
it's
no
good.
disrespect to
Jesse Leach
Jesse
really
Leach,
picked it up, man.
but
He
Jesse Leach
really
is
did it
improving.
justice.
But Howard Jones is my guy, and then you have Light the Torch, which is the band that he ended up in after he left Killswitch.
Right.
You got Evergrey. If Batman listened to a specific rock or metal band, I think Evergrey would be on his playlist, hands down. It's gothic, it's dark, yeah, it's progressive and brooding.
Yeah.
Robert,
But there's a hint of hope. Yeah, I
yes,
get that.
the
That's a very
hint
good
of hope.
analogy.
I mean, the Inner Circle album is actually my favorite Evergrey album of all time, along with Escape from the Phoenix. Um, Again, beautiful songwriting, beautiful melody, beautiful singing. I mean, I got to see Evergrey before the pandemic here in Tampa, and I was like, oh my God. I still have Thomas England's guitar pick saved in my
Wow.
stash of guitar picks because he threw it. People were too drunk to even care, but I cared. I grabbed it, kind of like when I saw Creed twice, and when we got to see Tremonti when he was touring for his very first solo album. I
That's
mean,
right.
moments like that are special. Um, Chevelle, I like the best way I like to describe it to people. If Tool had a baby that was more radio friendly, if you can call it that, Chevelle is it. Like, there's a lot of Chevelle that kind of reminds me of Tool. Granted,
Right.
Tool is a more progressive rock band. Make no
Right.
mistake about it. But boom, right there. You got Coheed and Cambria, who, first of all, we got a Puerto Rican as the lead singer. So right there, our
They
people's.
got your seal of approval, huh?
Of course, but what I find special about Queen and Camera, especially when I saw them live this past year with Incubus,
Mm.
another great band, um, is the fact that they're like what would happen if Led Zeppelin and Rush had a baby,
Yeah.
because they have those elements, they embrace those elements. It's just brilliant. I love Incubus. Brandon Boyd's voice is something else. Mike Einziger's guitar work, he will make the cleanest guitar tone sound heavy as hell for no explicable reason in an arena. I,
So with that in mind, both your secular and non-secular and religious music, how did growing up in church affect how you viewed music overall? Like not just Christian church, but music, but outside of that too. Like with all these different influences, like combating for headspace, how did you view church? Like how did you view music through the lens of growing up in church?
Given that I grew up in a conservative Pentecostal Latino environment,
Mm.
it created a lot of conflict, right? Because if you think about it, right,
Oh yeah.
when it comes to music genres, the prevailing genres in a 90s to 2000s era Pentecostal church from Latino America in New York City consisted of corridos, mariachi, boleros, ranchero, and then maybe hints of salsa merengue. They wouldn't go
Yeah.
all the way because they didn't want people dancing. Because for some reason, despite the Bible encouraging dancing and rejoicing, they thought
Yeah.
dancing was of the devil. Now, counting now the things that I enjoy when it comes to music,
Mhm.
it created a conflict. Because think about it, right? I'm a Latino in a Latino environment, but I like music that's very American rooted,
Right.
very Afro American rooted. I mean, Robert Johnson, the king of the blues, African American, Americana. A lot of rock and roll exists because of the mix of gospel,
And
which
R&B. Yeah.
gospel, country, and blues and jazz and everything. But yet the thing
Hmm.
was, because the environment was different, and majority of the people that we knew growing up in that environment, you know, it kind of creates the conflict because then also you're not just dealing with language, a language barrier, and also majority of the environment, folks weren't, educated in music, weren't educated in culture outside of their bubble. So it created
Right.
conflict because all of a sudden they hear distorted guitar, they're thinking, "Uh-oh, he's about to summon the devil now. Oh Lord, throw a holy oil, water, water." Like I'm like Jesus, they're acting like the hunters from Bloodborne, acting like I've turned into a beast for having too much blood. You know?
Well, I can interject right there because what
Yes.
happened was a lot of people don't understand that the landscape, because what our viewers don't understand is we grew up in Brooklyn, New York,
Mm,
in like late 80s, 90s, early 2000s,
yeah.
and the landscape was different than what it is today.
Oh yeah.
So you had pocket ethnic groups, like you had blacks segregated to one area, you had Hispanics in another area, you had whites on like white Italian in one, you had white Irish in another, you had white Jewish in another. And so you had all these different pockets all around New York City. And growing
Mm,
up in that time, like you and I both growing like Hispanic but old school Pentecostal Hispanic groups. So you had a lot of that culturally going on in Brooklyn, and I can attribute some of that lack of cultural knowledge
yep.
because there wasn't as much like intercultural mixing that there is now, and it's a different landscape now, way different than what it was when you and I were growing up.
Yeah,
And that's just something I wanted our viewers to understand, that we grew up in a different time in New York City. So New York City kind of evolves every, I'd say, 20-ish years, 15, 20 years, where one ethnic group moves in, another ethnic group moves out, and it just kind of becomes this circle of people moving in and out. And so they may not understand that, at one time, parts of Brooklyn were predominantly Hispanic. Like,
yep.
I think it was like Hispanic all of northern Brooklyn until you hit the bridge. And then below that, it was Jewish. And then below that, it was Italian. And then you get towards like Coney Island, it was like Russian Jew. And then it was like Russians and then Albanians. And then on the other side, it was black from like East New York or Crown Heights this way. And then
Yeah.
downtown Brooklyn had a little bit of like your beginning of gentrification happening in downtown Brooklyn because of proximity to the city. So,
Yeah.
and then you had a lot of people who were transplanting from the bottom of Manhattan into Brooklyn. So you had like a lot of mixing going on there where you had different ethnic groups living in one area in that part of Brooklyn. But other than that, like the landscape of Brooklyn was this group lives here, this group lives here, this group lives here. And I think that I mean, it was an interesting time to grow up in for sure. Because like, if you wanted to get food from certain ethnic groups, you go to like one area, like yo, I want soul food. I'm gonna go to like the brothers over here, or if I wanted Spanish food, I go up to the Latinos up north. So it
Yeah.
was a different time. So I get the lack of awareness of what other people are bringing to the scene musically because or things they weren't used to, they weren't accustomed to because they just didn't know. They didn't. You mentioned the bubble. It is almost like
Yeah.
a social bubble within your
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And
So
then
like,
even then, when you start dissecting like Latinos, you'd be like, okay, there's Mexican, there's Costa Rican, there's Nicaraguans, then there's Caribbean Latinos, then there's Dominican, there's Puerto Rican. So we could go on and on, but just I wanted to bring that out to the
oh,
viewers so that they
absolutely.
can understand that. But to
And
kind
then
of
and then if
go
you
ahead.
really think about it, in adding to that, right? So for example, within the Hispanic community, especially when it comes to the Christian environment, those more conservative genres that were part of the culture were predominant. They didn't really mess around with, like, for example, like how Baptist churches had a lot of African American. Guess what? You're gonna have that more modern gospel going on with touches of
Right.
hip hop, right? And New York City, what's the genre that's very prevalent in its blood? Hip hop.
Yeah.
I mean, from the Bronx all the way to Brooklyn, you know what I mean? That was part of it. Rock and roll, not really a prevalent thing in New York City at all.
That's right.
When you're thinking rock and metal, you're not thinking New York City. You're thinking Jersey. You're thinking Florida. You're thinking LA. You're thinking San
Yeah.
Francisco. You're thinking like other areas, oh, especially the southern area and in Texas and Michigan, like you're not thinking New York City, right? So then you got a guy like me introducing distorted guitar into a Pentecostal church.
Ooh, that went
What?
over me.
I felt like Chuck Berry walking into a white club,
Yeah.
or like the Elvis Presley of the time in that
Yeah,
regard.
I get it. I get
I
it.
would
A
not
lot of
say I'm
conflict.
of legendary status. I'm not gonna say that because my ego cannot allow that. Um, and
You're about to roll into my next question, which is
we're getting there.
how. No, that's literally it. Like, how have you responded to that criticism?
See, there was a divide, right? And it goes into this,
Mm.
right? So, for example, people from the old guard, the older folks, the rajatablas, the rompetablas, however you want to call them, the
Yeah,
very old school, got a lead pencil up their ass Pentecostal old folks. Oh,
yeah,
they weren't having it. They found at every opportunity to take little indirect jabs at me or any musician within the circle that had a more modern touch to music within the church.
yeah,
You know it. I know it. We both been through it, and we both seen the shenanigans behind that. Part of it is lack of cultural awareness and understanding. Part of it is not understanding music and how music has so much more than just what we know.
yeah.
And then part of it is also religious dogma that was being thrown in there. I mean, that it was a problem. So then when it came to old guard, there was friction. Like some of them, at least in my case, they liked me, but they did not like when I turned it up. However, when it came to the younger crowd, they just enjoyed. They had a fun time. They enjoyed what I brought. And then sometimes they were open enough where I was like, hey, listen, these are the bands I'm actually listening to. These are the artists I'm listening to. And again, at the time, I wasn't as exposed to a lot of secular or non Christian music like I am today. So I
Right.
was introducing them different artists that they probably never listened to a day in their lives because they were in that Spanish Christian bubble, and then maybe, just maybe, I might have been a factor in a little friction going in between the old guard and the young generation.
I would liken you to like Martin Luther as a reformist, as a someone like, you're lighting the torch. You may not be the one that carried it the distance, but you had to light it off. So like kind of like a catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire.
I felt like Martin Luther King on the outside, but Malcolm X on the inside.
I get that.
That
But it's
because
around
deep
that
down,
time that,
I was like, but the thing was, it was the whole element of playing politics and trying to find that bridge between the younger group and the old guard. But then in the process, this also affected me with my musical development because all of a sudden it got to a point where I was trying to water myself down so that I was more accessible
yeah,
to the older folks, but yet still be able to reach the younger group. But then in the process, I felt like I wasn't really being myself all the way. And I didn't really feel genuine up to a certain point. And it kind of made me have a sense of self-esteem
outcastedness.
issues. Self-esteem issues. I felt like an outcast, and to some degree, even a whole freaking pariah.
Yeah.
And throwing the fact that I was also preacher boy on top of that, that did not do me any favors. And then also the fact of like those that would kiss the old guard's ass, that wasn't the only thing that we're doing. There were other things they were doing on the low key. Meanwhile, I was one of the dudes that was seen as the rebel, and I was actually the more white bread baby face than the ones they liked.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because that's around the time frame that you and I met.
Yeah,
And, we're gonna I mentioned Outcast because, well, what our viewers don't know is you and I were in a band called Brotherhood of Outcasts. And we sure felt like that because I had a very similar experience growing up in the Pentecostal church and having that kind of background. It was a very similar story. And I felt like a bond with you when, you told me your story and I was like, yeah, like I get it. Like I feel the same way, man. It's like I felt enclosed. I felt like I don't like what the current status quo is with regarding to music and regard towards like the church and all that, and how it felt so crushing, almost like there was a weight on top of us, and they would
Crushing.
try to stomp out any kind of resistance that wasn't their norm, that wasn't what they deemed acceptable. And it's funny because we grew up in an era where the Christian rock was like, yo, you're the devil, you're Satanist, you might as well just,
Hmm.
it was the worst thing in the world. And now it's crazy because it's gone from that to now this Christian metal. So it's such a
Yo,
paradigm.
yeah,
It's
like for example, like
crazy.
you had guys like us, like not to toot our horns, but we were kind of trailblazing back in the 2000s,
That's a
right?
very good analogy. Yep.
Ask anyone who was wielding a guitar with distortion, doing English or Spanish, and then having a modern rock sound in a Spanish Pentecostal church, and I guarantee you,
No one in New York City.
us,
No one.
we were trailing that blaze, son. And then now today, what seemed like sacrilege and like the boogeyman, it's almost the norm. And then you guys, shout out to another creator that we know, James Franchise.
Yeah.
He's doing metal worship on his thing. That's his thing, and it ain't bad. I mean, I've listened to his stuff. It sounds pretty dope, and in the vein of Killswitch Engage too, which I really enjoy. Uh,
Mm.
and that props to him. He's there in the modern era now in New York City doing his aggressive worship thing. But back in the day, it was you, it was me, Larry, Sid. I mean, it was definitely a different time. And I look at it now, I'm like, now you go into a Spanish Pentecostal church, especially after the 2010s, hearing someone playing lead guitar with distortion isn't new. You will hear
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Drummers are not scared to blast beat anymore. They're not scared to do bossa nova anymore. They're not scared to go hard with their salsa merengue beats. The piano players, they're not scared anymore. They go
Mhm.
hard, and the pastors enjoy it. Even some of the older folks are now totally okay with it, which I think is
Oh,
awesome.
I would say there's been a cultural shift too, because we were talking about how different cultures lived in the area, and some of them moved out, some of them moved
Mhm.
on, some of them evolved, some of them. So we've watched the landscape of music in New York City change again, like from that 15, 20-year range. Because again, we've been doing music for 25 years almost. And that's crazy to think about concept wise, because just like we're not even that old. That's the crazy part. Like,
Oh, we're past the age demo of 18 and 35. We're now in the 36 to 55 target
I
demo.
know. Hey, we just got there, okay? Pump your brakes there, right? We
But
just
but
got
it's
there.
okay. But it's
That
okay.
is okay. It's a fun age. I'm having a great time, being a dad, and again, getting away from that mindset of the religion and how that I allow that mindset to affect the way I raise my children, because they're being raised completely different than the way I was. And likewise, I'm sure you with your daughter too.
Oh,
And
it's a it's
so,
it's a it's a massive difference because like now I see what my daughter likes, right?
mhm,
And how inclined she is into art and everything. And you see, back in the day, like for example, my dad, he liked the idea of me being a talented musician and a singer. He
right.
liked that. He encouraged that. He just didn't like the fact that, I'm a rock and metal guy. You know, God forbid he ever lets hell freeze over and walk into a bar lounge venue at a Brotherhood of Outcast gig, be like, you know what? That's my son. Ese es mi hijo. No hace lo que a mí me prefiere, pero ese es mi hijo. And that's all I ever wanted from my dad, honestly, out of my dad when it came to that. But
So for our non-speaking viewers, what did you say?
okay, all I wanted was my dad to be like, you know what?
That's
That's
my boy.
my son. He's doing his thing. Maybe not the way in my taste or in my
Right.
old-fashioned Christian way,
Yeah.
but that's my son, and he's showing that he has talent, and I appreciate that. That's my son. If my dad just showed up for a gig and he put his whole old-fashioned Christian ego aside and just simply just watches
Supported.
jam and have a fun time, I think even my relationship with my dad would have improved. But then there was also a clash of that because again, he's from that old guard, he's from that old environment, and they didn't have the education or the understanding the way you and I have. So when I look at my daughter, her artistic pursuits and potential, I'm like, you know what, kid, whatever you want to do, go all the way. Go
Yeah.
all the way. Just take the plunge, and do the thing. And I want her to do that because, I don't want her to end up having to set that second guessing feeling about her talents and her worth. I want her to go beyond even where I was.
Yeah.
And she one day goes, "Hey, Dad, I want to learn guitar." I'll be like, "Let me see your hands. All right, let's go." Like her hands are almost big enough where they're like, "All right, it's time."
Yeah.
He's willing to learn. So,
Man, you know the struggles I've had with that. I don't have guitar friendly hands, man. That's I've always had to have like smaller necks or just for adjustment set purposes because I don't have a wide stretch on my hands. So everything for me, like anything in the cage system works for me. But when you're
mm.
talking about lead guitar and stretching and hyperextending, I'm like, okay, there's only so much range around these little hands. You know what I mean? And it's not that I have little hands. It's just they don't stretch very far. And I've
well,
tried the exercises. I've tried the, having using my other hand and whatnot, but
well,
it
that
doesn't seem
that
to work that well.
well, that's where one of our musical amazing guitarists come in, Paul Gilbert, right? This
Yeah.
dude can do what Yngwie Malmsteen does with sweep picking and all that, but he shortcuts it.
Yeah.
It's not that
And
he
there's
can do the
shortcuts. Yeah.
stretching. It's just that he shortcuts it doing a lot of
Yeah.
sliding around. And I'm like, you know what? That's very old school blues stuff right there. So even something where you may feel limited because you don't have the super
The
like
range.
you may have the case of the stubby fingers, but you know what? Look, if the T-Rex is the king of dinosaurs and he's got tiny ass hands, that means he's able to do something. So even
That's a
guys with
quote.
less
That's a
range of the
secret
fingers
quote.
can do anything. Yeah. So there are ways around it.
So we're talking about music and we're talking about our old band and whatnot. Let's tell the viewers, what led to the creation of our old band, Brotherhood of Outcast.
All right. To understand how Brotherhood of Outcasts came to be, you also had to you also have to understand where I was in terms of band stuff altogether. By 2007, Robin Restored was broken up. Everyone was under separate ways because life does what life does.
Yeah.
I can't sit here and blame anyone or blame myself. Life happens, and life sometimes just doesn't care. And that's okay because life is like a giant, like a tree, like a set of roots of a tree. They expand wherever they will in order
Yeah.
to fulfill its purpose. So, like for example, like Ramel, he had to go his own way. You had to go your own way. Me, I had to figure myself out. And anyone else that was Andy, he had to deal with his thing. Life just happened. But at that point, I was done with bands. I was done. I was done. I was like, you know what, man, I freaking give up. I was okay with just being at my local church, playing guitar, and let it be that. I felt
Yeah.
so discouraged because I wanted to do more than just play at churches here and there. I wanted to actually get to that point of sitting down and recording. Now, had I known what I know now, we probably would have gotten to that point a lot sooner. A lot sooner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and would have realized you don't need a record label for that. You don't need a
No.
freaking studio to do all that. A laptop, audio, a nice friendly audio interface, have Logic Pro, and then just plug in and do some magic.
But
And
was Logic Pro what it is today back then? You know what I mean? Like some of the
the,
programs needed to evolve a little bit too.
the biggest difference with Logic Pro back then versus now is that now you got a virtual drummer.
Ah, that's true
And
too.
you
Yeah.
can tune your own drum kit, have it play different rhythm styles. But when you have a band, you got a drummer, then the main thing you had to worry about was, well, recording drums. Because you
Yeah.
could separate you could save the singing for last when it comes to
Yeah.
recording. Bass and drums, you can go like that. That's where audio interfaces come in handy. But again, I did not have the knowledge back then in 2007.
Right.
I was using like a prehistoric PC. I had not any knowledge of how to record anything. And then you fast forward to when you had a thing with Larry, and then you wanted me to join for the event.
Yeah.
I'm vaguely remembering.
It
Uh,
was like, yeah, something like that.
and then it just so happened that in the process, we met Arturo, we met Sid. And then I remember I was like, all right, just one time, but after that, I don't plan on committing to another band again. Like I really didn't want to do it. I just really didn't. I was already crestfallen from from everything, and especially all the shenanigans that Robbed and Restored had to go through towards its tail end of its existence,
Yeah.
especially with the Rajatablas in Macedonia. I ain't
Yeah.
forget
The
that one.
politics were crazy back then.
It was hard. It really hurt me. But then what happened? We started jamming, and the magic just was there. The
Yeah.
magic was
Well,
there.
because it
Bringing
stopped being
something up.
about the politics and it just started being about the music. And I think that's what felt right.
Yeah, it felt different. It felt special. And I was like, oh shit, we're a band. What do we do? Like, damn.
I like that quote. Oh shit, we're a band.
And then it's kind of like when a guy and a girl get together, they fuck and they realize the sex was so good and they got along so well. All of a sudden they're like, damn, we're a couple now. It's like shit, this wasn't supposed to happen, but here we are. That type of thing.
So
And then
that's how we formed.
I remember initially we were Golgotha because that was the
Yeah.
initial name, and then because we were just beginning to wisen up to the internet a little bit, we found out that there was a band out there already that had the name Golgotha. Whether they
Yeah.
had a trademark or not, that was a different story. And if I had known better, I'd been like, "Fuck it, let's just stick with the name. If it,
Yeah.
down the line we have to change it, fuck it." And then of course, just for some variation, so we can still kind of keep it, we went with Gorugota, which was kind of like a Japanese-ish type of pronunciation.
Mm.
But again, kind of hard to have it roll out the tongue on a regular basis. And it just wasn't gonna cash. So I remember we were like, shit, we need to like figure something out. Like we're like the name I mean, the name was cool. It's nice having the Japanese lettering and stuff, but we're not Japanese and majority of the people around us they're not gonna get it. We gotta
Yeah.
figure something out. And I remember the vision I had at one point of creating a group called the Brotherhood of Outcasts, where it was all about finding friends, family, people we knew in school, whatever that felt like they were complete outcasts of society and being treated like shit and giving them a place to belong. That's something I always wanted. And a lot of that inspiration came from the X-Men and of course the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from the X-Men.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know what? Look at us. We're in this fucking shenanigans. Yeah, Brotherhood of Outcasts. I think it makes sense for us. And hey, and it was easier to roll off the tongue. It was easier for people to say.
Yeah.
We had a logo that really stuck out. I mean, for crying out loud, I have it on my arm to this day. No shame in that.
That's right.
And you know, it was great. Yeah, we butted heads here and there, and then also we had a lot of learning experiences too. I mean,
We made a lot of good music.
I would say a lot of it was because the way we all grew up musically. Like Larry had a certain way of learning because of Manny, because his dad. Then there was the way you learned with your dad, because the way
Mhm.
Michael was. Like Michael was very from what I remember, he was very classically trained in the sense of like very by the book when it comes to
Yeah.
music
His
theory
approach.
and everything. Yeah, his approach was very old school in that regard. Whereas me, kind of like Jimi Hendrix, I just winged it and did everything by ear. And if I fucked up, I fucked up. And if it clicked, well, just take the ball and run with it.
Yeah.
And Arturo, again, he's very visual, but his ears are freaking amazing too. So he would just, weaponize his ADHD. And that's the thing was that had I think we would have had even more of a great time if we understood how to put all that together back in the day.
Yeah.
Because we all had something to offer on the table. We just didn't know how to put it together in a way where it's like, all right, we're not going zigzag everywhere. All right, you play in this way. How can we make that work with how he plays this, how Larry does this, and then with how I play?
Yeah.
It was that thing. And then of course the ADHD factor. The neurodivergency is undeniable, and I remember at one point we were like, "Yo, we need to rename the band ADHD."
Well, it's funny because around that time, that's when that study started coming out, and we're like,
Yeah,
"Yo, do we have that? Like, it's possible. Like, it's very possible that all of the members just had that in different ways
yeah,
and didn't." That's a very realistic thing because there were so many things that weren't diagnosed back
yeah,
then that are now starting to come to light, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why I think like that. That's why
yeah.
there's certain things where I'm like, now as an adult, I'm like, yo, could I have been on the spectrum? And I honestly, I think I was.
Bro, we're
I
all on the
think,
spectrum. We're all
yeah.
on the spectrum.
And it's no slight. It's not to make fun of
Yeah,
anybody. It's just that's how it was. We didn't know. We just operated in our spheres and just kind of all collided into one another, and still somehow we all came
made
together
magic.
and made really cool music. And it was,
Yeah,
I thought that was awesome. Like the fact that even despite all the like the hardships and the clashes in personalities, that we would still get down together and just bust out some tunes. And it's like, wow, like, and there were some gnarly tunes, man.
yeah. We definitely did something special because the thing was like Larry had that natural Latin rhythm groove about him. Like, yeah, he could do rock and metal, but Larry naturally had that. Yo, the Latin juice was in him. You couldn't deny it. It was there, and when you let it be, he just busted out. Arturo, yo, he is the pinnacle of weaponized ADHD, man. Like, bro, like it's like experiencing a drummer as the Kama Sutra. Or the Kama Sutra as a drummer. You think you're gonna be in one position? Guess what, motherfucker? You're going in another. You're going from
Well, and he changed.
missionary.
It's funny. He changed a lot of the time signatures. I do remember that
Yeah,
within
and it's
that scope, and it was very good that you pointed that out because it allowed us to broaden our like what we were accustomed to
yeah.
and challenge that and bring something different to the table. Like, okay, let me do something to accompany that. So
Hmm.
that's a very good point that you brought up.
So the thing with that, like for example, just to make it real quick, like for example, like back in the day, it was like, oh, it has to be just one timing, just one tempo, otherwise it's not gonna work. And then like what was it, like a year ago, I saw an interview with of Rick Beato with Mark Tremonti, and they were
Yeah.
talking about the click track, and they were talking about recording. And sometimes you see a lot of these old school musicians, they didn't use a click, they didn't use a metronome, they went with the rhythm. That's why when you listen to, for example, an Iron Maiden song, and let's say they go to the guitar solo, you're going from like, for example, if they're at 110 beats per minute, suddenly they switch up, and suddenly when they go to the guitar solo, it's at 140.
Yeah.
And then they kind of sink back down to 130 after the solo is over. And I was like, my life is a lie. And it really
Now
made
you just
me,
evolve. You evolve as a musician, and you
yeah, and
realize
it
that
really
people like
changed my
change the
understanding.
variation.
It really made me change my understanding of how we were doing things and why we were doing things back then. I was like, man, if we knew what I learned last year from watching that interview with Mark Tremonti, I think we would have doubled down on all the ADHD stuff and just give everyone a jolly time.
Yeah, I think it would have been a well if we knew then what we know now, we'd be a
Yeah.
much better band than we were, for sure. Especially like with all the skills that we've amassed over time. But getting back to how that and church and like the whole band life in church and how you separated, like how did being in that band allow you to find yourself and move away from traditional church values and just maybe church altogether? Because in my case, like I kind of found myself in the music. I found myself saying like I don't relate to this other stuff. Like it's not me. It's not who I am. It's not the Christian experience that I'm having, and I don't relate to it at all. And that led me to find a different path for my family and I. So how did that affect you?
For me, it was more of I had a clear understanding of who I wanted to be and who I am as a musician,
Mm,
but I always felt shackled and chained down. I felt like Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame when Judge Claude Frollo had him chained down and shackled, for just doing the right thing, and then the one mistake that he did that he shouldn't have done, he had him chained down. But then that wrath and sense of rebellion really woke him up, and it's like woke up the beast in him, and eventually just broke the chains off and said, "Fuck it." And it also helped that by that time, by around 2008, I had kind of withdrawn from the Pentecostal environment. I had gone more of a non-denominational environment, but
Yeah.
then life happened around, I want to say, like around 2009, 2010, when life happened, you had to take care of your stuff, and
Yeah.
plus, developing your newfound marriage at the time. Larry was up in the bell tower at the Salvation Army, so
Yeah.
he wasn't going to be available as a musician anymore. Arturo was going through his stuff. He was going through his thing.
Yeah.
And because out of respect for him, I'm not gonna go into that because
Yeah.
that's for him to tell. That's not my story to tell.
Right. And then he moved. I think that's around the time he moved, right?
It was before that, but there were other things happening.
Yeah. 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 For sure. For sure.
But then it came to me where it was like, well, where do I go from here? I felt lost. But then in the process, I was like, you know what? It's time to put my big boy shoes on and learn how to record, learn how to do my own thing. Because there was a time where my dad said, "Hey, you're always trying to do this band thing. What about making your own music?" He wasn't wrong,
Yeah.
and I'll give my father credit to that. That wasn't a bad idea. It just wasn't an idea I was ready for at the time.
Right.
I felt like
And
the
then he just
experience of
planted the
the band
seed and
helped me.
walked away.
Yeah, it's like, hey, just food for thought, mijo. I'm like, okay, but now it's like, hey, the band experience, everything that came full circle, and I don't regret any of it. For
Me
all
neither.
the crap I went through and dealt with and had to condone within that church, within that Christian environment, I learned so much from it. And
Yeah.
it made me, in some ways, a better musician, more focused, and have a better understanding towards when I sit down and record something, I have a better way to focus that spectrum, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, And then, but then the sad part is that when it came to the environment itself, I eventually had to remove myself from the Christian environment. Nothing
Yeah.
against the people that I met personally. It's just the fact that it just wasn't aligning with where I was anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because without getting too political, the kind of people they didn't want you to be around are the people I had no problem being around.
Yeah.
And the kind of people they expected me to not be best friends with were actually some of the closest friends I ever had.
Yeah.
And if it came down to being involved in church ministry environment and betraying my friends or sticking to my friends, guess what? I'm gonna pick my friends, you
Yeah.
know, because churches come and go. The church crowd within those circles will come and go too. But when it comes to friends, man, that's like creating your own family outside of your own bloodline.
Yeah.
And you can't change that just for the thing they're trying to tell you. It's like kind of like how I know it's a little outside of the spectrum of this, but it's kind of like the whole storyline with Cody Rhodes and The Rock right now in wrestling, for example. At one point, The Rock tells him, "You're a great champion. You know that. They know that. But I want you to be my champion." Cody Rhodes, "I want your soul." And of course, right now in the story of that, he's like, "My soul belongs to this ring. My soul belongs to them." In other words, he's like, "I'm not going to betray the people that love me, the people that been there with me when I was down and out and falling apart in my career."
Yeah.
And he literally told them, "Go fuck yourself." And for
Yeah.
me, I had to kind of do the same thing with the church environment, and thus me being an ex-evangelical.
Yeah. I
But
get it.
the
I get it.
but the aftermath of it is hard because then it's like I've been so strongly ingrained in that environment that when it comes to understanding the world around me, the people around me, to this day, I sometimes feel at a loss because those are social skills that you have to relearn because now it's like you're not in that environment.
Different group, different people. Right.
Yeah.
I think that after the whole band era for us, it was a transition because we ended up forming another band, my wife and I,
Yeah.
and we were a metal band, and it was awesome. Like we immersed ourselves in that, and we kept coming upon more resistance from the Christian church, and it ended up being like just more bad experiences with Christians, and I kept finding myself being consoled by non-Christians, and I found brotherhood in the outcasts. I found brotherhood
Yeah.
in people who, like you said, the church would normally excommunicate or say that person's no good for you. And it's like, no, these are the people that actually care. These are the people that in my ninth hour or 11th hour, whatever you want to say, they were there for me, when family members died, when people were hurt, when I was hurt, when these are people that broke bread with me that were like, hey, yo, you need a hug, you need money, you need time, you need whatever you need, I'm here. And I kept running into experiences with just terrible Christians, like just terrible human beings. And it's not to say that they're all bad, because there are great people out there from every denomination and every, you know, religious belief. But because I do believe that goodness in and of itself is not just a Christian value, it's just a humane value. I think it's a human experience to experience being good, to experience just like bad. And it's not to a select group of people, it belongs to everyone. And you have the ability to discern things, and you have the wisdom to rationalize and say, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior. And I think a lot of people use influence, peer pressure that you brought up, anything to control people as a means so that they can feel comfortable about their own insecurities. And after the whole band era for us, and then we just kind of like moved on with our lives, we kept running into just negative experiences with people who were manipulators, people who were just terrible human beings. And I kept finding my people, my tribe outside.